Hello girls, we are going to learn today about the different classifications of public debts. So which are they? So we have the first category that is known as internal and external debts. What is internal debt? Internal debt is raised from within the country from various sources. Okay, like there are market sources, the government can borrow from banks, from non-banking financial intermediaries, from the businessmen. So there are different sources for which are in the within the country. So when the government borrows on within the country, from within the country, it is known as internal debt. And what is external debt? External debt is owed to foreigners or foreign government institutions. So, which are the so foreigners means it can be foreign country, any foreign country, and foreign financial institutions like IMF, IBRD, that's World Bank, or Asian Development. But there are different sources for borrowing. Japan Bank for International Cooperation, that is our JBIC project. Japan Kudivella Pathadi in the Malayati പറയും. The bank, the helper is from Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC project. So government borrows from foreigners or foreign governments or institutions, that is known as external debt. The second classification is productive and unproductive debt. So, what is productive debt? Productive debt is expected to create assets which will yield income sufficient to pay the principal and interest on the loan. Suppose if you take a loan, okay, from within the country or from outside the country, and if we take that loan, but if the government takes that loan and spends it for what's that called for just for election purpose, okay, so can we consider it as a productive debt? Because the election purpose, if you spend, you cannot get any income, it does not yield any income after that. And the government takes loan and will spend for a construction of an international airport. It is an asset that will yield income in the future, and the government can repay the principal and the interest on the loan from the yield sufficient. So from the assets, from these assets which will yield income in the future. This kind of debt is known as productive debt. So what is unproductive debt? So productive debt are debt is expected to create assets which will yield income sufficient to pay the principal and the interest on the loan. What are unproductive debts? See another okay, yeah, productive debt. There is one more thing. They are self-liquidating, which means it itself will see that the principal amount and the interest on a loan can be repaid. Okay. On the other hand, loans raised for war do not create any assets. They are dead weight and are regarded as unproductive. So, the unproductive debt is also known as dead weight debts. They are a dead weight. It means it's like a weight, dead weight and regarded as unproductive. So, unproductive debt are also known as dead weight debts because it is coming from the dead bodies which are useless, right? So, some weight is there, but it has absolutely no income is generated. So, such kind of loans are spent, loans raised for war like purposes or any solving any internal conflict like so these are the purposes which it does not create any asset, and as a result of that it is known as unproductive debt or dead weight debts. Okay, so the next is short term and long term. What are short term loans? Short-term loans are repayable after a short interval of time. Examples are treasury bills, which are payable after 3 months, 3 to 9 months it can be. And they are and the short-term loans are intended for what? In order to bridge the gap temporarily between current revenue and current expenditure. So, in the budget, there is a revenue and expenditure is there, right? So, if there is any gap between the current revenue and current expenditure, which means current expenditure is more than current revenue. So, in order to bridge the gap, government introduces or government borrows short-term loans. So interest on such repayable amount are generally low. Loans have to be repaid, right? But the interest on such loans are very low, and it is also known as floating debt. Floating debt. Next, the category is short long-term loans. So, as the term suggests, long-term loans are payable after a long time, covering several years, say roughly after 10 years or more. So, they are also called funded debt. Sometimes this word can, what do you mean by funded debt? Funded debts are long-term loans raised by the government. So usually such type of debts bear a higher rate of interest. So usually long-term loans are raised. It will be mainly for productive purposes. Okay, maybe construction of a railway bridge. Okay, so construction of roads also can be. So but will take long time. So long amount will be higher, and interest also will be higher. So similarly, in between the short-term debts and long-term debts, that's also called a medium-term debt also. The next category is redeemable and irredeemable debts. So remember to pronounce debt properly. B is silent. Okay. So redeemable debts are those loans which the government promises to pay off at some future date. So redeemable debts have certain time limit, right? They have to they come to an agreement. There's a time limit, a contract in which they have to pay the entire loans with the interest. Whereas irredeemable debts are those in which principal amount are never returned by the government, although it pays interest thereon regularly. So the government pays interest on the amount, but the principal amount are never returned by the government. Such loans are known as, or such debts are known as irredeemable debts. So the difference between these two kinds of debts is that when a loan is redeemable, the government has to make some agreements for repayments, for its repayment. So money has to be arranged for this purpose, usually from tax money, introducing fresh taxes. Hence, burden of the debt falls on the taxpayers. That is a speciality of redeemable debts. Loans have to be repaid. So if it is repaid by introducing fresh taxes, imposing fresh taxes, then the burden falls on the taxpayers. These four loans we already discussed. I'm doing it again for your benefit. Okay. Now next one is funded and unfunded debts. So the funded debts are, already we have seen what are they. Funded debts are long term debts which are repayable after a year at least. So at least 1 year period will be there. Funded debts. It can go up to 10 years also, but anyway it is a longer period of time. In other words, it's a kind of definite period debts. A proper agreement of repayment is made. Moreover, a fund is maintained by the government for the purpose of repayment. So all these are important. So funded debts are long-term debts which are repayable after a year at least, which means if they have some definite time period in order to repay. So a proper agreement of repayment is made. Moreover, a fund is maintained by the government for the purpose of repayment. Okay. What are unfunded debts? These debts are paid off within a year. Treasury bonds are unfunded debts because they are for 3 to 6 months and are never for a longer period of 1 year. So unfunded debts are shorter period debts. They have to be repaid, or it has to be repaid between 3 to 6 months and are never for a longer period of 1 year. So generally unfunded debts are incurred for the purpose of filling the temporary gaps in the budgets. Then there's something called voluntary, voluntary and compulsory debts. So what are voluntary debts? Voluntary debts are debts which are paid without any legal enforcement. So what does it mean? There's no illegal enforcement means it means people voluntarily and willingly subscribe to government loans by their own accord, ability, will and convenience. There's no force from the part of the government. So how do people voluntarily subscribe to government loans? By their own accord, of course with their own ability, will and convenience. What are compulsory debts? Compulsory debts, however, imply force, but they are most unpopular in modern democratic society. So when government uses, where the government do not mind the ability, will and convenience of the people, but force to subscribe to government loans, these are known as compulsory debts. Okay, but it is a very unpopular in modern democratic society. Next one is marketable and non-marketable debts. So what are marketable debt? Marketable debt is the one in which securities are negotiable in the open market. Securities are negotiable in the open market, which means it can be bought and sold in the securities market. So non-market debt is that where the securities cannot be sold in the stock exchange markets. The main objective is to prevent fluctuations in their prices. So we have next the gross and net debt. So gross debt consists of the total amount of debt outstanding at any time. So whereas net debt is the balance amount of gross debt. What is the balance of what? Gross debt minus sinking funds and other assets earmarked for repayment of debt is called net debts. Okay, gross debt minus, okay, minus sinking funds and other assets earmarked for the repayment of debt is called net debts. Okay, net debts. So you have next. So these are the different classifications of public debt. Okay, so I stop here. This is one class. I'll stop here. So wish you good luck.